Good morning to everyone, and welcome to the sixth webinar related to African swine fever. Today, we will discuss about treatment of Swill to inactivate African swine virus with Dr. Mary-Louise Penrith. In fact, we do know that banning Swill feeding is not implementable in most countries. So, shouldn't we rather find ways to make it safer? The objective of this webinar will be to discuss advantages, disadvantages of feeding Swill in the context of the global discussion of food waste. We will, of course, discuss the condition for virus inactivation for Swill feeding to be safer, and Dr. Marie-Louise Penrith will provide us some example that has been successful in her experience. The webinar will have only one speaker today. We were willing to have colleagues from East Asia, that have strong experience in industrial Swill feeding, but as they are currently in the process of changing their regulation, it was not the appropriate timing to have them participating in this webinar. So hopefully we will be able to have their feedback later on this year. You are welcome to write any question you may want to raise to Marie-Louise Penrith. For this, you have a chat box that is available at the bottom of your screen. Please write them as soon as they come, and we will read them at the end of the presentations. Now I would like to introduce our dear speaker. Dr. Marie-Louise Penrith is a veterinarian. She has been involved in pig diseases and specifically in African fever for more than 20 years as a pathologist in Onderstepoort Veterinary Institute in South Africa. She also coordinated a program for animal health assistance to small-scale farmers. Since then, she has been providing expertise and assistance on African swine fever epidemiology and control to the FAO and the OIE in 10 countries in Africa and Europe. She has also been involved in projects to assist smallholder pig farms to improve productivity and health. So with this, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Marie-Louise. Marie-Louise, if you would like to share your screen.
Thank you. I need to presentation. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm very grateful to have been asked to talk to you this morning. I'm working from a very slow computer and I'm rather elderly, so I'm not very good with technology, but I hope we're going to all make it through to the end without losing each other. I just want to talk about whether we can make and how we can make Swill feeding safer. The definition of Swill is quite important because it's often used broadly to cover any feed that's given to pigs that's not commercial. But strictly speaking, Swill is kitchen refuse and scraps of waste human food mixed with water for feeding to pigs. Swill is historically the most traditional food for pigs, and it's likely that their ability to thrive on leftover food and to be attracted by leftover food wherever it was to be found was the most likely incentive for domestication of pigs. In fact, it has been said Swill feeding was so common, particularly in the early times of pig farming, that it's been said that if a regular source of Swill is available, pig keeping can even be profitable. So, not all food items pose a risk to pigs. Well-defined food waste, waste that emanates from factories that make a specific product like bread, vegetable markets where the only thing that's sold there is vegetables and there's some wilted ones left over at the end of the day, that sort of feed should pose no risk, and we'll go into that more on the next slide. But poorly defined food waste that emanates from kitchens, catering outlets, retailers can pose a high risk because it can contain uncooked or undercooked meat. Safe food waste, I've just shown a picture here. You can remind yourselves that vegetables, bread, eggs, fruit, And any kind of grain products, like a lot of pig keepers in Africa, I know, use brewer's grain for their pigs. In the island of Mauritius, they use, and I'm sure in the East you could find them, a large amount of broken noodles, which are not able to be sold to the public because they don't look so pretty. So those are given to pigs, and those things are all perfectly safe, all kinds of restes from crops as well. But risky food waste has variable content, and it might contain various sausage products and smoked and cured products are not suitable because the African swine fever virus can survive rather well in them. And then you get things like sandwiches which might have a slice of not so well cooked pork products on it. Some of the things will be safe, fruit and vegetables, but in general, it is considered risky to feed this type of swill without preparing it. The advantages of swill feeding, of course, are firstly that it usually costs nothing and it's readily available. I'm not sure in Asia, but there are many places in Africa where people can't actually access commercial ration for pigs. And most of the time it can be fed safely to pigs with no harmful consequences, or people wouldn't be doing it. But the disadvantage are that it does have a comparatively low nutritional value, chiefly due to the high water content. It can, because it's human food, it can contain levels of salt that are sufficient to cause salt poisoning in pigs, which are quite sensitive to that. It may contain non-food items that were around the kitchen, like plastic, broken glass, and other sharp objects. And of course, it can pose a high risk for diseases like African swine fever and classical swine fever through meat scraps. Now, as you heard, I'm asking the question, should swill feeding be regulated by law? Because legislation exists at various international, regional, and national levels, most of which prohibit swill feeding. Many countries have legislation that either prohibits swill feeding or lays down conditions for making it safe. In my own country, they lengthened the time of cooking from half an hour to an hour, and I'll tell you why I don't think that's practical later on. The problem is implementation. Nobody has enough resources to monitor what is being fed on each and every pig farm. For example, a recent survey in South Africa turned up 296,000 households that were keeping pigs. 90% of them had less than 10 pigs each, and they cannot be visited every day by somebody who's checking on what they're being fed. And the incentive to feed swill is very strong because pigs are often kept by poorer people as a sort of a coping strategy and a reserve of funds when they really need it. And obeying the law is far less important to them than economic survival. So the bottom line is we need to find a way to manage swill safely. And I don't think this scenario can work very well, where the lady has a pig, it's an expectant pig, she's feeding it whatever she can, and a policeman arrives and he tells her she better stop doing that, and she'll probably say, oh yes, I'm sorry, I know. And as soon as he's gone, well, it's obviously going to continue because what else is she to do? So we need to have a constructive approach to swill feeding and accept that it happens, but it should be made as safe as possible. One reason to focus on processing food waste is that the amount of food waste that has in the last few decades become a matter of global concern. And the problem is ethical and practical. Firstly, how can such waste of often usable food be allowed, if it was only cooked, be allowed when so many people are going hungry? And then, on a practical level, how can one continue to safely dispose of all these tons of wasted food? By processing food waste into safe feedstuffs for animals, notably pigs, food production and food security would be enhanced and the disposal challenge would be minimized. Just some facts about food waste and the amount that may be available. Industrialized countries produce enormous amounts of food waste. But even in poorer countries where food waste is less common, urbanization results in availability of food waste to a much greater extent than in rural areas. And the following estimates were published in 2011. potentially usable waste exceeds 8.3 million tonnes in the UK per year. It's a small country, it's got a big population, but that's a lot of waste. Processed into pig feed, it could produce 80,000 tonnes of pig meat, more than they're producing at the moment per year. The USA is estimated to produce potentially usable waste in excess of 40 million tonnes per year, which would produce much more pig meat, probably about 500,000 tonnes. So processing food waste into pig feed could be a sizable industry, but it can be done at household level or as a cottage industry as well. And that's where my experience is more at household level. So I won't be going into a lot of detail about industrial processing, but I will supply some literature at the end. So ensuring that soil is safe at farm level, it does involve cooking. The ASF virus is inactivated actually by heating at 60 degrees centigrade for 30 minutes. But in practical terms, we know that every little household does not have a thermometer where they can test. So we say boiling for 30 minutes with stirring to ensure that an even temperature is reached throughout the mix is recommended. And in my view, longer periods are unnecessary, firstly because after 30 minutes that virus is dead. And so if you cook it for longer, you're wasting resources, and it's a disincentive for implementation because nobody wants to stir the same pot for an hour. But this approach to just cooking the material has allowed informed farmers to continue to feed swill during an ASF epidemic without it being a source of infection, even with a high risk of infected pork in circulation. And I saw this happening on a small farm in Kenya, where unfortunately I don't have pictures to show you, but the gentleman had a small herd of pigs. He collected swill from all the hotels that he had identified as being good suppliers every day. He brought it to the farm. He had 3 ladies who sat and cooked the swill and chatted to each other. And then after taking out safe things like fruit and so on, and then he fed it to his pigs, and they were looking pretty good on it, and he certainly didn't experience African swine fever. But if one has to sound a caution here that the practice of cooking swill has to be part of the farm routine and implemented regardless of whether there's an ASF or other outbreak around. Because if they stop doing it, they're not going to be doing it when they need to do it, because you never know when the first infection is going to come in. And achieving household level acceptance of this extra work requires excellent advocacy and extension, and of course it is assisted by farmer experience. If a farmer has done this safely and people see that he's farming his pigs profitably, even in the midst of an epidemic, they're going to be much more convinced than if you just tell them it's okay. Now I'm going to talk about a larger scale type of production, and I put this in picture. I think it's slightly in the wrong place, but please just remember it when we talk about the next slide. That this was during the first epidemics of African swine fever in the West African country of Benin. And the farmer there was buying in whatever he could. And because he was afraid that something he bought in might be infected with African swine fever virus, he had people there with pots who cooked everything. It was then spread out and dried in the beautiful sun that we have. The farm was very protected and the pigs were confined, so nothing could actually get to the food and eat it while it was being sun-dried. Then they bagged it up and used it as pig ration, and his pigs were looking excellent, and he didn't get African swine fever at all during the time that it was most dangerous in his country. So the small-scale processing of soil can either be done by a local entrepreneur or cooperative pig farmers. It can obviously be done by an individual for his own pigs like that, but if one could get local entrepreneurs or cooperatives of pig farmers doing it, that would be even better, because everybody could benefit from it with one transport of all the soil to be processed. Outlets such as hotels, restaurants, hostels, hospitals, and or retailers are identified, and food waste is collected on a regular basis. It's sorted to remove any non-food or unwanted items, and it's boiled with stirring for 30 minutes. It's then dehydrated by oven drying or sun drying. In industry and industrial scale, there are other methods of heating, but oven drying or sun drying are the most practical for on-farm or in-village or small-scale production. The dehydration means that you're ending up with something that is much more nutritious than the unprocessed swill with a lot of water in it. And the final product can be milled and bagged as a low-cost, locally available feed for pigs. And right, it's no longer free, but it's going to be a lot cheaper than commercial rations are normally and a lot more available. Then we can also consider, because of the amount of waste, food waste available, what was proposed in 2011 by Dr. Peter Roeder, formerly of the FAO, was industrial processing. One would limit the processing to household and catering retail or retail outlet food waste and exclude food waste from ports and airports. It's not that the processing doesn't destroy the virus, it does. But food waste from ports and airports has been the classical way of introducing African swine fever over long distances into countries. Both the major introductions into Europe were considered to come from that source, as well as the introductions into the Caribbean islands and Brazil in the 70s. And so that is excluded simply because, apart from anything else, it's more likely to contain something infectious, and it's more likely to get hijacked on the way and taken and fed to some pigs without processing. So that should be excluded. In any case, there are international rules that should be destroyed safely. Employ production processes that are guaranteed to destroy infectious agents of concern. And because Dr. Roeder was speaking in England, he specifically noted, with the exception of prions, which the causes of bovine spongiform encephalopathy are excluded by safety assurance further up the food chain. And I mention that because when we were considering in the island of Mauritius processing of swill, because it's a very big tourist destination and there's a lot of hotel food available, I put it to someone who was helping the country with waste management, and he said, oh, no, it'll be far too expensive. The temperatures you have to reach, yes, if you want to destroy prions, but it's not likely to be there, and they are excluded by safety assurance further up the chain by excluding the high-risk materials. Then processing plants could be licensed to produce quality-assured dehydrated meal or pelleted feed. Such processed feed can be branded. For example, in Japan, there is a type that is branded as eco-feed. Further research may be needed to determine the nutritional qualities of such feeds and to explore ways to produce an array of products, and I expect that's partly what they're doing in Japan at the moment, and we'll all be tremendously interested to hear about it when they're ready, because I think it will be necessary to have some information, once this is industrial, some information on the label as to the protein content, the energy content, and so on. People do expect that if they're serious about pig farming. So the conclusions are that swill consisting of kitchen waste is widely fed to pigs and has advantages for farmers. So prohibiting it does not prevent it, because if you can't implement legislation, there's not a great deal of point in having it. Processing food waste renders it safe and can increase the amount of pig feed that will be available, and thereby you can increase the amount of pork that can be produced. It can be done at farm, community, or industrial level, but we need innovative approaches and awareness creation to gain acceptance, because people say, oh, no, I'm not going to eat pigs that have been fed garbage, as they might call it. And the fact is that most people are not questioning what their pigs or what the animals that they eat were fed in any case, but we need to show that this is something that should be done and can be very advantageous and will definitely not cause human or animal disease. And these are just some references that I have put in when you get the copy of this, and if you're interested, you can follow up on them. There really isn't an enormous literature on swill processing yet. It seems to be quite a new concept. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Marie-Louise. It was very clear, very to the point, on the interest of keeping swill feeding, but also how to manage it in practice. I see we already have one question, so I will read it and give you the opportunity to answer, while maybe we will have other questions. So, outstanding presentation, we agree. Are there models for communication campaigns which have focused on proper treatment of swill in face of outbreak rather than a ban? Would you be aware of this?
I'm not aware of any specific case.
Okay. Which can be something interesting to dig on our site, because the OIE is working currently on communication campaign on African swine fever. We have already developed some material, but we have not at all discussed about swill feeding, and maybe we could consider this in the future also with some partners. I already see another question. May I ask if you know any swill treatment facilities available at the market for farmers to use readily?
No, I don't know of any facilities like that at markets, and it would be an excellent idea because, as I say, this is a very new field, and I have only seen this, my personal experiences, I've only seen people doing this at the level of their own farms. And unfortunately, the best chance that we had to get it going, which was in Mauritius, was kind of crushed by somebody from Europe who said, no, you have to destroy the prions, you have to render it up to 1,000 degrees or something of heat, which is not practical. So, no, but I think that a market would be an ideal place to have a processing place.
While waiting, if there's additional questions, I would like to highlight the international standards, and specifically, let me find the right one. I would like to show it on the screen. Yeah, here it is. So this is the OIE chapter in the Animal Terrestrial Code related to infection with African swine fever virus. And what I think is interesting in this code, in this chapter, of course, we have general provisions and things for countries infected or free from African swine fever, recommendation for trade. But in Article 15.1.22, we have also some recommendations in terms of inactivation of African swine fever virus in swill, in meat, in casing, and in other commodities. And you will see that there are very stringent recommendations for inactivation in swill, but I like this point number 3, where equivalent treatment is possible as soon as it is demonstrated to inactivate African swine fever virus. And it was all the purpose of this presentation today. Well, Dr. Marie-Louise Pendris proposed us an alternative to the 2 previous statements for inactivation of swill, and providing reference that it has been efficient or effective to inactivate African swine fever virus in swill in Africa. With this said, I will be checking if we have other questions. No, not for the time being. So apparently you're, yeah, another one. Yeah, a question from related to the recommendation itself, comparing the 90 degrees for at least 60 minutes to 60 degrees for 30 minutes. Would you have comments on this?
60 degrees for 30 minutes is what destroyed the virus in every laboratory experiment they've ever done. So, but 60 degrees is something, it's not a temperature that you can recommend to a farmer, because how's he going to know when it's reached 60 degrees? So that's why we say boiling, which is theoretically 100 degrees Celsius, because you can see it's happening, you can see the bubbles, you don't need to have a thermometer. But it's over the top, I mean, definitely. And by the time you're going to do it for an hour, like our regulation is, people probably aren't going to do it, and you'll have really cooked that virus to death, and probably most of the nutritional value of the food as well. But see, the absolute known fact, 60 degrees for 30 minutes kills African swine fever virus. So, as I say, boiling is a practical way to suggest that private people do it, because I mean, even I in my house don't use a meat thermometer to see what temperature our meat's getting to. But we don't. That's quite fancy, and we don't do that. But definitely, those temperatures are far over the top, and I don't know. I don't even remember. That must have come in as one of the things from one of the countries, because I'm pretty sure that's not what the working group said originally.
So if I may conclude, in practice, for swill feeding, boiling for 30 minutes, according to you, is enough.
Yes.
So boiling,
absolutely.
so approaching 100 degrees.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So I thank you very much, Dr. Marie-Louise Penrith, because it has provided us a very practical information on how to manage it. As you know, these webinars are mainly targeting Southeast Asia, and countries in Southeast Asia, it would be difficult to implement in practice the ban of swill feeding. So it's really important for us to have alternatives, how to make swill feeding safer. And I think you perfectly answered this question. So thank you very much for your availability today and for providing us with your expertise. I would like also to thank all the other participants to this webinar. This webinar will be has been recorded. Has been recorded and will be put online in the coming days. I would like to inform you about the next webinar that is planned again on an ASF related topic that will be about risk communication. We are still trying to adjust the date, so either it will be next week on the 16th or the week after on the 23rd of July, but it will be at 2 p.m. Bangkok time again. So thank you very much for joining, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much too. Bye-bye.